My goal for you tonight, especially the students in the audience, and it's great to see that so many of you are students, is to convince you that you can build your own global connections, your own connections abroad, okay? To do this, I'm going to tell you a story of a college student and how he started out building his own global connections. That student is, of course, me. Where did that remote go? Oh, sorry. Okay, so that's me, 21 years ago, on my first trip to South America as a college senior in Peru. I was part of a large group of students. My wife and I were part of a large group of students. Where did Laura go? She's out there somewhere. She's in the back. That's Laura. That went to South America. About 70 students. Imagine a group of 70 students and 5 professors just going around South America for an entire trimester. That's what we did. And that was the starting point for our experience. Now, I'm going to tell you about the place specifically that I keep going back to. This is Peru. It's where we keep returning to. You may find a different place to keep returning to, but for us, it was specifically Peru. And within Peru, a park called Manu. And so that's in southeastern Peru. This is a large rainforest park. It's a chunk of pristine rainforest, Amazon jungle, about the size of Massachusetts state, okay? And so we started, our tour included visiting here, and since then, about every year, we've been returning there, we've lived there, we've done various things. So what I want to do tonight is tell you about that place and the things that we've been doing there. On the first trip, the thing that really got me hooked on Peru was this kind of animal, okay? It was a thrill to get to the rainforest and see its tremendous biological diversity, as a biology major even more so. But spotting this jaguar on my first day in Manu really captivated me. This is a magnificent cat, and it was very fortunate to see it, and I became hooked on Peru at that point. What got me going from there was I received a job offer at the end of this tour from the company that took us there. Imagine getting a job offer after going there to be a tour guide in the Manu Park. Naturally, I said yes, and I went there and worked for about 3 years. Now, as I grew as a biologist, I got really more intrigued by other kinds of animals. So I'm a zoologist, but I focus on the creepy crawly more than the jaguars, like worms. Or worms, as my son used to say when he was smaller. So this is a giant flatworm creeping around our bathroom floor in Peru. It's brightly colored, it's slimy, it's doing whatever it does in the bathroom, okay? Now, as you connect somewhere abroad, you may find some particular aspect of a place that you can latch onto that will help you keep growing, perhaps professionally or personally or both. For me, the component in Peru's nature that I latched onto were tapeworms. Okay, so this is a tapeworm. This is the front end of a tapeworm with its hooks that it uses for attachment. This is a tapeworm from stingrays in the rivers there. I was able to focus on tapeworms, various species of tapeworms from stingrays in rivers in Peru and also in Brazil. And that enabled me to keep going back to Peru. It was an excuse to go there and enabled me to keep going throughout my graduate work. And I was able to discover different species. This one is named after Ella Fitzgerald. Another species, I even got to discover new species of stingrays, okay? And so that was my hook per se, okay? But it wasn't just the biology that got me excited about Peru. It was the people there and the cultural diversity that we found there. In the Andes Mountains, for example, it's pretty common to see people like this family of farmers speaking the language Quechua. Maybe you've heard of Quechua. Quechua is the actual language that the Inca civilization spoke. It's still being spoken today. In fact, it's Peru's second language, second to Spanish. So there's cultural diversity in the mountains, but my focus was more in the rainforest. So here we have a teenage boy, this is a Machigenga Indian, standing next to his family farm in the foothills of the Andes Mountains, the edge of the Amazon jungle. The Machigenga are one example of a tribe that we see around when we go to Manu, that we interact with. Some of them work with us. And what I find really interesting is that they have retained a lot of their cultural practices. In fact, if you were to remove his t-shirt, this could be what it looked like 500 years ago. They're doing some of the same cultural practices that they did before European settlers came to the Americas. I found it really fascinating, the close connection between the people there and their rainforest environment. And the people there are entirely dependent on the jungle, and it has to be intact. So this woman here is holding something. It's a head. Yeah, okay. What kind of head is that? Anybody want to make a guess? What do we have here? Craig? Sam? Capybara. He got it. I don't know why. Okay, so this is a capybara. You see the teeth there? This is basically like an overgrown guinea pig. It's a rodent, and it's a popular part of the diet of rainforest peoples there. Now, when you look at this picture, to us, this image is raw, and you might even find it gross. But what does this mean to this woman? Well, it means a protein-rich dinner that evening, probably in the form of a stew made from the head of that animal. So the people there are completely dependent on their rainforest environment. And I think this is a good time to mention that, again, December is Universal Human Rights Month. And if you think about this example, you could say it's a human right of this woman to have a forest that remains intact because she completely depends on that to live from it. And that right gets taken away if there's development, say, by oil companies who come. So that's just something I want to mention at this point. Let me explain what's happening in this picture. Okay, so during my early times there, I would stay with people and try to learn from them. And one of these people was this shaman named Alejandro. So Alejandro is a shaman, an Amazonian tribal medicine man. And he would sometimes wear a traditional dress. In this picture, he's wearing a hat and a collared shirt. Okay, but he's a real medicine man. He uses medicinal plants to treat people in his village. So what's happening in this picture? That's a snake. Okay. Here's a group of school kids. And I don't think you could do this in the USA without getting sued. But anyway, we're in Peru now, okay? So what's happening in this picture is Alejandro is holding a snake up close to this student. So what had happened in this scene? A group of school kids came to Alejandro's farm to learn about some examples of medicinal plants. And the kids were hanging around in the yard, kind of poking around as kids will do. And while they were doing that, they lifted up a log and found a snake. Okay, and the kids screamed and said, "Oh, get a stick, let's kill the snake, because snakes are bad, right? You should kill snakes, right?" Okay, well, of course, that's not the answer here. Alejandro picked up the snake. He said, "Look, this is actually a good thing. This snake is not venomous. Most species of snakes are not venomous. This is, in fact, it eats mice, okay? And mice are a real problem. If you have a settlement in the jungle, your grains that are sitting around, they're always getting munched on by rodents. So actually, the snake is your friend. This snake is actually a good thing." Okay, so he was teaching them a lesson that not everything they think that's bad or scary about the rainforest is that way. Actually, some things are quite beneficial. And to make that point, he made every student in the class stand in front of the snake and he held it over them, like anointing them with this reptile. Okay, and they did. They all went through that experience. And I was watching this scene. And at that point, I think I learned a really valuable lesson about conservation. That is, if you're going to conserve some place, if you're concerned with the welfare of a habitat, you also have to be concerned with the welfare of the people that live there, because there's a connection between the well-being of the people that live in a place and your ability to conserve it, or their ability to conserve it. And that comes up later in this talk. Okay, so we went to Peru for several years and had these experiences which enabled us to do different things. We brought other people with us. Laura and I ultimately had 2 kids. They're older now than in this picture, and we brought them to Peru several times. Our continued returning to Peru meant a lot to the people that were there. This is Felipe Gomez. You'll see him again. He's an Amazonian Indian of the Yine tribe, different tribe from the Machigengas. He got to know our kids, knows our kids. And so when you go to a place again and again, you can build stronger connections there. The people there really appreciate it. And when they see you bring your kids there, that means even more to them. And so this is one thing we did, and it really strengthened the connections we made there. So over the years, I was in graduate school, Laura was in graduate school. We kept going back to Peru when we could. We would stay there as long as we could. And sometimes to do that, we had to be willing to live fairly cheaply and be relatively poor in order to maximize the number of days or months, sometimes even a couple years, to stay there as long as possible so we could keep learning this place. But we're always going back to Manu, okay? And this set the foundation for the things that I'm going to tell you about now, okay? So 5 years ago, we were able to form an organization called Project Buena Vista. This is a nonprofit organization. The basic aim of Project Buena Vista is to conserve rainforest through two kinds of activities, education and medical outreach. Okay, and so I'm going to tell you about some of those activities that we've been able to do. First, I want to introduce you to the place that serves as the hub for Project Buena Vista. So this is a 100-acre property, and these are a few buildings and the gardens at the edge of the property. Most of it's jungle. This is a 100-acre property that's called Buena Vista. That's the hub for all of our activities. Felipe Gomez, who you've seen in the slide now, is the person who's responsible for taking care of the place, for growing beautiful gardens there and keeping the trails open so that visitors can walk through the forest. This was an important place. We actually bought this property 15 years ago, Laura and I did, for a couple reasons. One reason was the location of Buena Vista is key. It's at the corner of this park, Manu, where there's, on the other side of it, there's a lot of villages. It's in a zone where there's been deforestation, but that stopped years ago and now the forest is gradually coming back. So it's a key place because it serves as a corridor for wildlife, such as jaguars. Okay, and we would see jaguar tracks and sometimes hear jaguars while we were staying there. The other reason we were compelled to buy this property was to protect this giant tree. So the portion of Manu where this property lies has been logged, largely logged, and now the forest is recuperating. And it's very rare in this part of Manu to see a giant tree like this. This is what we call a giant kapok tree, okay? And so that's part of the property there, and that's one of the reasons we're compelled to do work there, to protect that tree. And I've got to mention Felipe again. So Felipe Gomez has been key in enabling us to do the things that we do. He takes care of the place, but he's also been a teacher for us. So over the years, Felipe has taught me much of what I know about the rainforest. And in this picture, you can see he's giving me a lesson about some kind of plant. I'm more of an animal guy. I forgot the name of the plant, but it's some kind of plant that has a very strong red dye that lasts on your skin for longer than 1 day, okay? So just be careful when you go experimenting with dyes there. You might come back to US Customs with paint on your face and have to explain that, okay? So that's Felipe. So first a bit about what we do in terms of education. This is my end, okay? I've brought now 2 groups of SUNY Oneonta college students to Buena Vista and other sites in Peru. Here's the group from 2012. This group, and then a group in 14, and I have a group coming next year. Those students have just enrolled. I want to show you a video, I think, rather than explain it. I'll just let you observe the students in their daily activities during this field course. This is a biology class.
This is the first invertebrate biologist at Buena Vista. 2012, 17 students are describing various groups of invertebrates for their assignment. String sample was crucial. I'm glad you use it well like this.
Okay. So my hope in bringing students to Peru to experience the rainforest firsthand was that they'd learn something and they'd take what they learned with them and that it would enhance their lives. And I think that works. It worked for me as a college student. A couple of these students have now returned to South America since that first trip. And at least 2 of them are now school teachers. And so they're sharing what they learned about the rainforest in the classroom with their own grade school students so that knowledge gets passed on. So that's the educational side of things. I want to talk about medical outreach now. So this is a picture of my wife, Laura Reyda, who just is in the back there, doing acupuncture on a woman in a clinic in near the property Buena Vista. Okay, so Laura had the idea to try this out about 4 years ago. She had been trained actually here in New York State in acupuncture and herbal Chinese medicine. And she had the idea to connect her training to this connection we had in Peru that we'd been building for years by doing acupuncture pro bono in clinics there. So she started this about 3.5 years ago. Since then, she's brought groups about every 6 months. And it's been incredibly rewarding for her because the results are right there in front of your face. Okay, so she'll have someone walk into the clinic with a limp. After they get treated, they walk out normally. Okay, so this side of Project Buena Vista is by far what's really benefiting local people. It was Laura's idea. She had the imagination to try this out. It wasn't an obvious win. In fact, when we talked about it, a lot of people were doubtful that it would work in Peru because Peruvians hadn't had any background with acupuncture. They had maybe heard of it, but had never tried it. Okay, but as a matter of fact, it was a winner. Peruvians did come to the clinics. They come to the clinics in droves. Some of them don't live in town. They hear it on the shortwave radio, and they come in for the day to get the free treatment. And so what was interesting is that Peruvians were willing to try out acupuncture and herbal Chinese medicine, and that this was less of a transition for them to make than it is for, say, people in this country, because they already had experience with herbal medicine and folkloric medicine in their own local rainforest setting. And so that has been working very well. The other thing that makes acupuncture work really well in these settings is that it's very simple and you don't need many resources to do it. You need the clinician and her needles. You don't even need electricity. You don't need technology. You just need a place to do it. And the clinics have gladly let Laura and her team of volunteers use the room in those places. And sometimes, because you're in the jungle, electricity is not stable, like the lights go out and they're working in the daytime, they just keep working. So acupuncture itself is a modality that's lent itself really well to this scenario. So this slide shows 1,000 stick figures. It's actually more like 1,600 people that they've treated by now. If you figure they've gone 7 times or 8 times, and each time they stay for a week and treat 200 people. And so they have made an impact. Some of those people see them again and again each time. And so that has been how Laura has been able to plug in her connections, her experience to this Peru connection. Oops, we'll watch the video. Okay, that video was, of course, in Spanish, but I'm going to explain it to you. So the basics of it, for if you didn't follow the Spanish, she starts off giving the women in the hallway, mostly women, some dietary advice. And you may have picked up some words like vegetables, eat vegetables, minimize the amount of fried food that you have. These are things you've heard before, right? That's pretty straightforward. But what she does at the end of the video is maybe a little weird, maybe a little new for you. What does she do there? She looks at the tongues of the people. Okay, so that's a diagnostic tool in Chinese medicine. When you look at someone's tongue, you can look for patterns that are helpful in understanding their dietary problems. Okay, so that's what she's doing in that video. The opportunities that you grab, that you may run into when you go overseas or think about going overseas, are not always obvious. So this is Caitlin. She's not an acupuncturist, but she served as a volunteer on Laura's trip, one of her trips. She wasn't able to do acupuncture, but she was able to make a difference simply by providing support for young family members of those who were getting treated. That was an important trip for Caitlin. It was, it changed her life, she says, and ever since that trip, she's been a big advocate of our organization. So not every opportunity that you take is obvious. Some things will be less obvious, and you kind of have to use your imagination, okay? I showed this photo to make the point that it's okay to be afraid when you go abroad. There will be uncomfortable moments. There will be awkwardness, not only around the language, but what you are doing. Like, for example, taking a ride on a river with a very small boat, okay? Stay safe, but be okay with being a little afraid. It's part of the adventure that you're seeking out, okay? There's one other thing I wanted to mention back here about Laura. So she's speaking Spanish. Laura speaks Spanish, I speak Spanish. We both started going to Peru as adults. We knew very little Spanish. We learned everything basically there. I'm going to start ripping on my own Spanish. Hers is a little better. Maybe it sounds a little better. But in both of our cases, it doesn't sound too pretty. It's not a thing of beauty. People, my good friends in Peru, every year they make fun of my Spanish. It's kind of a running joke, you know, the things I say and how they sound like a gringo talking. But it works. We're able to do these things there. We're able to communicate and do the things we need to do there. The reason I'm mentioning this to you is so often when I talk to students and try to coach them into trying things out abroad, they say, well, I don't know the language. Don't let that stop you. And don't let sounding a little silly when you try a foreign language stop you. You just kind of have to dig in and do it. And you'll be fine, okay? The worst that's going to happen is you'll provide them ammunition for some humor, okay? And that's my approach. Okay. Now, the story I've told you tonight is my story, our story, of how we've been connected to a foreign place over the years at the local level. Your story could be different. Maybe you know other stories that are completely different. I know a lot of people who have somehow found a place away from home that they keep going back to, that they feel connected to, and that their ongoing visits enhance their own lives and the lives of the people around them back home. Okay, so here are some examples. This is SUNY Oneonta's own Tammy LaPalooza. She's in the biology department. She teaches in the biology department. She went to the Bahamas Islands as a college student, fell in love with the place, then for graduate school managed to convince her advisor to allow her to keep going to the Bahamas to do work. And so she did a really cool study on land crabs, which are a species there that's heavily used and is under heavy pressure. She is now teaching biology classes and plans on bringing a group of students to the Bahamas within a couple of years. Okay. This is one of our compatriots from the original college trip, Laura Reyda. Laura Reyda is a Spanish teacher in Chicago public schools. Laura's particular passion on our trip was not the Peruvian rainforest. She was more interested in the clubs and the nightlife of Buenos Aires. And later on, she fell in love with Argentinians and also their sport, soccer. She's a big soccer fan. She goes there every year. And when she comes back to the classroom in Chicago, she shares those experiences with her students there. You don't necessarily have to go abroad, though, to see cultural diversity. This last photo is of a man we know, Tim Kelly. Tim Kelly has, for much of his adult life, repeatedly visited Pine Ridge. That's a Lakota reservation in South Dakota. Okay? Here he's sitting with a medicine man from Pine Ridge, a Lakota medicine man. He did service there. He repeated his visits there for years. Now he's settled in New York State where he offers sweat lodges to people here in the Otsego County community. So there's lots of different ways in which you can plug into the world. But our angle was to do it locally, to keep going back to the same place and keep going back to those same people and building those connections. Whatever you decide to do, those adventures are really up to you. The bird is in your hand. Thank you.